mentioned the two big tours going on, and he mentioned Beyonce's. What's Beyonce's tour, Andrew? It's Beyonce's.
It's not Lemonade.
It's something. It's a big tour. But then he said, and then Britney's tour. The Eras. That's kind of cute, though.
I would say I don't know that.
But if you haven't figured out that
it's
it's Taylor Swift at this point, it's wow. I don't know.
I was trying to think if my dad could think of Taylor Swift.
I think most people could come up with Britney's been in the news for other. Britney's been in the news for other reasons.
Sure.
Yeah.
She's got a book out. Britney's got a #1 book on the. She beat Barbara Streisand.
Maybe that's what he's saying.
Meantime. Yeah. Maybe that's what he's thinking about. Mm-hmm. The House China Select Committee sending a letter to Apple CEO Tim Cook asking to explain why the company will no longer produce Jon Stewart's show on Apple Plus. The letter asking for a briefing from Apple by mid-December, in part saying the following, quote, "We know from previous incidents involving production companies other than Apple that fear of the CCP's documented history of retaliating against companies and the lure of the PRC market and PRC-based financing have significantly chilled the creation of American content that could be perceived as critical of the CCP. Joining us right now is Congressman Mike Gallagher, chair of the Select Committee on China. Good morning to you. So we've seen this movie or TV show in some ways before. There have been a number of instances where big media companies have changed either pieces of film, TV shows, and other things in part because they want to do business in China. Do you think that is, what is the role of the U.S. government in influencing or not a U.S. media company or a U.S. business in that regard?
Well, first of all, let me say, in this instance, we just want to understand what happened. And if Apple and or Jon Stewart just wants to have an off-the-record conversation with us, that's fine. We want to understand the complicated decisions that businesses make in pursuit of access to the Chinese market, or if they want to tell us that the reporting here was simply inaccurate, I'm open to that as well. And indeed tried to reach out informally with no success. The bigger issues at play here are as follows. One, in order to even get into China, the entertainment industry has to censor any storylines critical of China, usually hit the cutting room floor. There's also a phenomenon of self-censorship going on. And you, Andrew, who have one foot in this world, probably understand this better than I do, where before, pen is even put to paper, nothing critical of China would be part of a script. Why does it matter? Well, at least for a couple of reasons. One, in order to win this competition with China, we're going to have to do some hard and costly things, which means we need the support of the American people. In the old Cold War with the Soviet Union, even your average American who didn't pay attention to geopolitics understood what the KGB was, understood who the bad guys and the good guys were. Here we have no cultural reference, in part because Hollywood does not want to anger the Chinese Communist Party. It makes doing difficult things even more difficult. The other thing I would say is if the CCP...
I don't disagree with you. I think you're absolutely right that there is a self-censorship that takes place perhaps in the world of Hollywood. The question I'd ask is, what is there for the role of the U.S. government in that, insofar as at the same time you, I think, would say you're a free marketeer. And so the question is what the government's supposed to tell a U.S. business about making decisions. There's lots of things that businesses do because they want to have a relationship with another company or another country or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that I or anyone in Congress dictates to Apple and certainly Jon Stewart, who's actually funny and I'm not funny, what creative decisions they make. That's not the role of the U.S. government. And, to the extent we have a role, we could potentially cut off the access, Hollywood access to, let's say, the Pentagon's resources if we don't like the decisions they're making with respect to China, right? If, for example, they try and take the Taiwan patch off Maverick's jacket, or if they remake Red Dawn, which was a travesty, by the way, because Red Dawn was a masterpiece, and change the bad guy from China to North Korea, maybe they don't get access to federal government resources, but that's the extent of it. Right here, I'm saying let's investigate in order to understand the decisions they make. And then if we want to be critical of their self-censorship because it gets at this idea that the CCP is effectively wielding a veto over creative decisions in America or tamping down on free expression and creativity in America. Or if we just want to point out the hypocrisy of Hollywood, which constantly lectures us about social justice issues, but is conspicuously silent when it comes to the CCP's genocide in Xinjiang, its threat to provoke a war over Taiwan, or its terrible environmental record at the time climate change seems to be the primary social justice issue for many in Hollywood. We can do that, but I'm not saying we legislate creative content.
I think those are all important points. I was going to ask you about the standing ovation that President Xi got last week when he was in town in San Francisco by dozens of U.S. CEOs, and talking about the signals that you think that sends, both in good and bad ways.
Well, first of all, I know that a lot of the people in the audience listen to your show. So sincerely, I want to convey, I don't wake up every day trying to like poke the financial and business community in the eye. But when you give a genocidal communist dictator a standing ovation, I mean, you're not just like provoking the potential concern of a Republican member of Congress. There are bipartisan concerns around that, given everything that Xi Jinping is doing. And this idea that somehow we're going to go back to the status quo pre-Trump because Xi said some nice words at the U.S.-China Business Council and because business executives paid $40,000 to drink Sauvignon Blanc with him is naive. And it's also dangerous. And I think it masks the fact that Xi Jinping is saying one thing to an external audience and an entirely different thing to the internal Chinese Communist Party and domestic audience. To his internal audience, he is preparing for conflict with the United States. And in the same dinner, he said, well, you need to decide, America, whether you want to treat us as a partner or an adversary. Well, then he goes back home and talks about the United States as an adversary. He's been talking about the United States as an enemy. Clearly, we just choose to ignore that part. And these business executives, I think, do not help the cause by giving him a standing ovation.
Do you think, though, having a relationship is meaningful and matters? We had the Treasury Secretary on yesterday, and she was talking about a number of large issues that the globe is going to be confronting on so many different sort of elements, and having that relationship, being able to talk back and forth, even on the military issue. We've talked, I think, before, Congressman, about, do we have somebody to call in China if there is a military moment as it relates to Taiwan, and we have not historically. It may be that as it relates to just what took place last week, that maybe we will.
I support the establishment of a crisis communication channel to reduce the risk of miscommunication. The idea, though, the accidental war fallacy has very little empirical support. The idea that we're going to go to war because our ships accidentally collide, I don't think it's true. We're going to go to war if China decides to invade Taiwan, but if she actually makes the decision, which gets to the broader problem with the Treasury Secretary's analysis. On paper, I get the logic of, okay, we got to work with China on XYZ issue. Obviously, we're going to have an economic relationship going forward, though I support selective decoupling, as we've talked about before. But show me the area. Show me the area where China has been a constructive actor. Proponents of engagement with China make the case that our interests align on climate change, stability on the Korean Peninsula, non-proliferation, and public health and pandemic prevention. Just analyze each of those areas and give me the evidence that China, despite repeated attempts by multiple U.S. administrations to accommodate them and work with them, has been a constructive actor. They have not been a constructive actor. So to go back to that fallacy, I think undermines our interests and gives cover for Xi Jinping to advance his agenda. And his agenda is not only regional hegemony, but it's displacing the United States as the dominant global power. That's the analysis of the Biden administration lead on China in the NSC, not my own. So that's my concern with this approach.
Congressman Gallagher, here it is always a longer conversation. We're going to continue it with you, I am sure, very, very soon. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.